Chaim. During the reign of King Chizkiyahu, King Sancheiriv, the Syrian king, marched with his army, the greatest army on earth, to conquer Yerushalayim. The Torah tells us that his army consisted of 185,000 battalions. Rashi says that each battalion had up to 2,000 soldiers in it, which would mean...
That's more snacks I have on my plate.
I don't know if that's the maximum or that's an average, which would mean there were 370 million soldiers marching on Yerushalayim.
They probably need more snacks.
They came and they saw Yerushalayim in the distance, and Sancheiriv saw the little city of Yerushalayim, and he started to laugh. He said, "This is the great city of Yerushalayim. We don't even need to wage war against it. I can tell each one of my soldiers to pick up a few pebbles, and we'll throw it into the city, and we'll bury the city." Chas v'shalom. As they approach the city, he sends out one of his generals named Rav Shakeh. Rav Shakeh was actually a Jew who abandoned his religion. And he came out and he spoke to the people of Yerushalayim. He said, "People of Yerushalayim, you have no chance against this mighty army that's surrounding you. There's no chance. Don't think that Hashem could protect you." Right? The gods of the Midianites didn't protect them when Sancheiriv marched against them. Sancheiriv conquered large portions of Africa, the Middle East, Asia. So Hashem's not going to be able to protect you, he says. And your army doesn't stand a chance against us. As a matter of fact, our smallest battalion here has 2,000 soldiers. I could send you 2,000 horses if you want to march against one of our battalions, but you don't even have 2,000 soldiers to mount the horses. So you might as well give up. You stand no chance. King Chizkiyahu went into the Beis Hamikdash and he began davening to Hashem. He says, listen what they said about you, Hashem. And shortly afterwards, the Navi Yeshayahu appeared to the king, and he said to him, Hashem heard your prayers, and not only will you defeat Sancheiriv and his army, you won't even have to lift up your swords. And King Chizkiyahu, it was that night, he went to sleep calmly, and during the night we're told that an angel of Hashem came down and killed all the soldiers, all 185,000 battalions of Assyrian soldiers. Sancheiriv went back home alone the next day, and he ended up being killed shortly afterwards. Do we have a Yom Tov to celebrate this victory? Anybody? Do we have a holiday to celebrate it? Not really. Right? Now, it happened to be that this miracle happened on Pesach, and we have a Yom Tov of Pesach, but we don't mention this miracle anywhere. We don't celebrate it. If you look through Jewish history, we find many similar stories of miraculous victories, miraculous salvations. Right? We mentioned a few weeks ago the story of Gideon with his 300 soldiers who waged a war against 135,000 Midianites. Right? And if you look through our history, you'll find countless stories like this. As a matter of fact, if we would make a Yom Tov for every time Hashem miraculously saved us from our enemies, we would never stop celebrating. Right? We would have a Yom Tov pretty much every day of the year.
Every second of the year.
But we don't make a Yom Tov every time Hashem saved us.
Not for long.
So the obvious question is, this question is asked by Levi Yitzchak of Raditchev, what's so special about those salvations, those times that Hashem saved us, those miracles, right? The miracle of Chanukah, where you have a small band of Maccabees that fought off, right, the great Syrian army. And if you look at it, there wasn't, it doesn't seem like it was certainly a miracle, but if you compare it to the miracle of Sancheiriv, it doesn't seem to be such a great miracle. It's guerrilla warfare. It happens all the time. You have a small band of soldiers who are hiding, they hide in the caves and the mountains, and they fight against a larger army. Not only that, if you look at the result of this miracle, if you look at the result of the miracle of Chanukah, right? It wasn't such a complete victory. As a matter of fact, a few months after the miracle of Chanukah, the Maccabees were back at war, right? The Syrians came back with another army, right? It was only 30 years later that they actually managed to throw off the reign of the Syrian government. What?
Chanukah's because of the menorah and the oil.
It certainly has to do with the menorah and the oil, but the menorah and the oil was a celebration. They came to rededicate the Mizbeach after the military victory, right? And if we're going to make a miracle over the oil, right, is that something we're going to celebrate for 2,000 years, that some oil burns for a few more days? Right? Obviously, the oil represents something. It represents our victory over the Greeks. So what's so special about this miracle? We have a few other Yom Tovim, Pesach, Purim. Why are these cases singled out to make a Yom Tov to celebrate it for throughout our history and forever? So, in order to answer this, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Raditchev brings down the Gemara that speaks about the story of Chanukah. It tells us about the great miracle that happened, right? The military victory, and then how they came to the Beis Hamikdash and they wanted to celebrate it. They wanted to light the menorah, and of course we know that only enough oil for one night and it burned for 8 nights. And then the Gemara tells us that after this miracle, a year passed by. And the next year, when Chanukah came around, the rabbi said, we had a great miracle happen last year. Let's make a holiday. Let's establish a holiday. L'shana ha'acheres. The following year, the rabbis established a holiday. Why did they wait till the next year? Why didn't they make a holiday right away? Right? They should have made a holiday as soon as the miracle happened to show their celebration for Hashem. Why did they wait a year?
Because you need it on that day.
They what?
You need it on that day.
So you're saying they couldn't have made it that day because they didn't know how long the oil would last, right? Okay, so as soon as the oil finished burning for 8 days, they should establish a holiday and say that we're establishing a holiday we're going to observe every single year, right? Now, obviously, you would have to wait till the next year to actually observe the holiday, but the holiday could have been established immediately. In the year 1910, in the city of Lodz in Poland, a young boy, Avram Tzvi Greenwald, was born. When Avram was about 8 years old, unfortunately his father passed away, and he was sent off to be raised by his cousin, the great Torah scholar Rabbi Menachem Zembe. He wrote books on Torah, is known as the great Talmid Chacham. Now, when he was 17 years old, in the year 1927, his cousin took him to Warsaw for the Great Wedding. What was the Great Wedding in Warsaw in 1927? Anybody? We celebrated it last week, right? Mm-hmm. The marriage of the Lubavitcher Rebbe to the daughter of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Chayamushka. They had the Great Wedding in Warsaw in 1927. And Torah scholars from throughout Europe came to celebrate this wedding. And Rabbi Menachem Zembe came to the wedding, and he took with him his cousin, 17-year-old Avram Tzvi. Right? They rejoiced, they celebrated the wedding, and the day after the wedding, Rabbi Zembe went to visit and speak to the chassan. Right? This was the Rebbe. He was still very young. He wasn't the Rebbe yet. He went to speak to the Rebbe, and he took his cousin with him. So they came to see the Rebbe, and the Rebbe had a whole conversation with Rabbi Menachem Zembe. They discussed many areas of halacha, many areas of the Talmud. And at the end of the conversation, the Rebbe turned to the boy who was with Rabbi Menachem Zembe, Rabbi Avram Tzvi, and he said to him like this. He said, we're now a few days before Chanukah. So let me ask you a question about Chanukah. Right? Chanukah, of course, is a time of great rejoicing. But amongst Hasidim, the custom is that out of all the nights of Chanukah, the biggest Chanukah parties are always on the 5th night of Chanukah. On the 5th night of Chanukah, that's where the big parties happen. What's so special about the 5th night of Chanukah? Now, there are many reasons given, of course, for this custom, but Avram understood that if the Rebbe is asking him a question, he shouldn't give his own answers. He should wait to hear the answer that the Rebbe has to give. So he kept quiet. And the Rebbe says, let me explain it to you. The whole idea of Chanukah is that on Chanukah we have the power to light up the darkness. right? We light a candle. We light the candle at the door, at the window. We light it outside. We want to light up the darkness of the night. And you need, in order to light up the darkness, you need a great and powerful light, right? And the greater the darkness, the greater the light that's needed to illuminate that darkness. Now, out of all the nights of Hanukkah, the 5th night of Hanukkah is the darkest night. Why is it the darkest night? Because if you look at the calendar, you'll find that the only day of Hanukkah that never falls out on Shabbos is the 5th day of Hanukkah. Right? The 5th day of Hanukkah is the only day that could never fall out on Shabbos. Of course, Shabbos, we have the Shabbos lights. So all the other days of Hanukkah sometimes fall out on Shabbos, sometimes during the week. The 5th night of Hanukkah, which is never on a Shabbos, it's always during the darkness of the week. That represents the darkest night. And you need the greatest candle, the greatest light to illuminate the darkest night of Hanukkah. So it will never be Rosh Chodesh, no? It won't be Rosh Chodesh either. So it'll be Chavtes, yes. Lamed is going to be Rosh. It's either if there's Lamed and Lamed, then Aleph are Rosh Chodesh. If there's no Lamed, then Aleph is Rosh Chodesh, and there's only one day of Rosh Chodesh. Okay? So, okay, that's a very nice explanation. They said goodbye to the Rebbe and they left. And 20 years passed by after this story. Now, during those 20 years, Avram Tzvi had a very, very difficult life, right? Unfortunately, the Second World War happened, and Avram Tzvi lost his wife and 5 children in the war. And after the war, in 1948, he came to America, and he settled in New York. And he got married to a second wife, also a survivor from the war. And before his wedding, he went with his father-in-law he was in New York. He wasn't a Chabad Chassid, but his father-in-law told him, if you're about to get married, you're in New York, why don't you go visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe? Okay, fine. So he went to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe. This was the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe. And, the Frierdiker Rebbe asked him, about himself. He told the Frierdiker Rebbe what happened, how he lost his whole family in the war. The Frierdiker Rebbe cried when he heard the story. And after he finished speaking to the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe told him, you were 20 years ago, you celebrated my daughter and son-in-law's wedding. So why don't you go see my son-in-law? Just go to his office, speak to him a little bit. Okay, so he went with his father-in-law, Avram Tzvi, and his father-in-law went to see the Rebbe. And as soon as he walked in to the Rebbe's office, he said, the Rebbe immediately recognized him. He said, "Oh, it's been 20 years since I seen you, since I saw you at my wedding. Maybe you could tell. Last time you were here with your cousin, Rabbi Menachem Zembe. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about what happened to him. Rabbi Menachem Zembe was killed, unfortunately, during the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and he spoke a little bit about it. And after they finished speaking, as they're getting ready to leave, the Rebbe said, "Listen, my father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, sent you to me. So obviously he wanted me to say over some words of Torah for you. He wanted me to tell you over some words of Torah. So I have an interesting Dvar Torah I want to tell you, right? You know, as I'm sure you know, that amongst the days of Hanukkah, the 5th night of Hanukkah is a especially joyous night amongst Hasidim. Do you know why? What's so special about the 5th night of Hanukkah? Again, he was smart enough to keep quiet, and the Rebbe went on to explain how Hanukkah is the time when we have the power to illuminate the darkness, and the 5th night of Hanukkah represents the greatest darkness, so you need the greatest light to illuminate it. Actually, let's go back a little bit. The previous time, I skipped out a very important point. So, sorry about that. So, back in Warsaw, when the Rebbe finished saying about how the 5th night of Hanukkah has the power to light up the greatest darkness, the Rebbe said that no matter where a Jew finds himself, on Hanukkah, he always has the power to bring light. And the Rebbe concluded that it doesn't make a difference whether you're here in Warsaw or whether you're in London, you can always bring light into the darkest places. Right? So now the Rebbe is repeating the same Dvar Torah over 20 years ago, and the Rebbe again concluded, and this time he said, it doesn't make a difference whether you're here in New York or whether you're in London, you can always light up and illuminate the darkest places with the power of the light of Chanukah. Okay, very nice. The Rebbe remembered him, and the Rebbe even remembered the same Dvar Torah that he said over 20 years ago. Okay, he went on, he got married, he lived in New York for a few years, and eventually he moved, 5 years later, he moved to Toronto. And another 20 years went by, and it was time for Avram's son to get married. Right? Avram's son's name was Moshe Chaim Greenwald, so it was time for his son to get married. And of course, for his own wedding, he had gone to visit the Rebbe. So for his son's wedding, he's going to take his son to visit the Rebbe. Now, at this time, he had become a Satmar Chassid. When he was living in Toronto, he lived among Satmar Chassidim, and he was a Satmar Chassid. And at that time, there was a lot of friction between Satmar and Chabad, and a lot of his friends who were Satmar Chassidim didn't speak so nicely about Chabad. But Avram himself always knew, he had met the Rebbe, and he always spoke very, very, very respectfully about Chabad. So he came to see the Rebbe with his son before his son's wedding, and they came into the Rebbe's office, and the Rebbe says, wow, another 20 years. It's high time we met again, especially since last time my father-in-law sent you to see me. Right? The previous time he wasn't the Rebbe yet. Now he was the Rebbe. And they spoke a little bit, and Avram turned to the Rebbe and he said, you know, Rebbe, is it okay if I ask you a question? A difficult question I have. And the Rebbe says, of course, if my father-in-law sent you to see me, right, 20 years ago, I'm sure you have a right to ask me a question. Okay? So my question is like this, he says. You know, I have a lot of friends and neighbors who are don't speak so nicely about Chabad. And they're against the whole concept of Chabad sending people out into the street to try to put on tefillin with people. And, you know, one of my neighbors recently told me that this is against the Torah. Because in the Torah, we have a pasuk in the Torah that says, Aloi mesanecha Hashem esna, that those who hate Hashem, the enemies of Hashem, I have an obligation to hate them. So how could you go over to a person who threw away the Torah, right, who went against Hashem, and how could you reach out to him with such love and try to you know, you should run away from such a person, right? They're the enemies of Hashem. So the Rebbe says, let me ask you something. If your neighbor's daughter would leave the path of Torah behind, right, what would be his response then? Right? What would be his response then? Would he say she's an enemy of Hashem? I don't want to have anything to do with her? Or perhaps he would say this case is different, right? There's a mitzvah in the Torah, mipsarcha al tisalim, that you cannot ignore your own flesh and blood, right? Your own family. And he would do everything he could to reach out to her and to help her. Now, to Hashem, every single Jew is like an only child. And for my father-in-law, the Rebbe said, every Jew was part of his family. And that's why no matter how far a Jew is, we always have to reach out to them and show them great love and bring them closer to Hashem. And to conclude, the Rebbe says, let's conclude with the word of Torah, right? As you know, the fifth night of Chanukah is the most joyous night because it represents the greatest darkness, and you need the greatest light to illuminate it. And it doesn't make a difference where a Jew finds himself, whether he finds himself in Toronto or whether he finds himself in London. On the fifth night of Chanukah, you have the power to light up the darkest places. Okay? So he went back home to Toronto, and another 10 years passed. And now, this was in 78, his youngest son was getting married. And his youngest son found a shidduch with a girl from London. So the whole family traveled together to London for the wedding. And as they're about to leave Toronto, his neighbor knocked on his door and said, I need to talk to you about something. Okay? Unfortunately, as you know, my daughter has, left the path of Torah a while back, and I was just notified that she ran off to London with a certain guy, and they want to get married over there. And since you're traveling to London, I did everything I could. I reached out to family and friends that I have there, and they try to reach out to her, but she doesn't want to have anything to do with me. And I was thinking, since you're traveling to London, maybe you could try to do something. Maybe you could try to help. Okay, he doesn't know what he could do, but he said he'll do everything he could. And he went to London for the wedding, and of course, he started asking people, maybe there's, what could we do? There's this Jewish girl who wants to get married to a guy. What do we do?
And she changed her mind and decided to get married too.
He was told there's only, the only people who can help you are Chabad, right? They're shluchim who are specialized in this area. And he was told to reach out to Rabbi Avram Yitzchak Glick, who had experience with this type of thing. And they said, if anybody can help you, it's him. So he contacted Rabbi Glick. He told him the whole story. He gave him the girl's contact information. And then he went to celebrate his son's wedding.
How many sons?
A week and a half went by. And he gets a call from Rabbi Glick, who says, I want you to come right away. I have something you need to see. And he went to Rabbi Glick's house. And as he walks into the house, he sees his neighbor's daughter sitting there in a chair and crying. And he looks behind her, and he sees a menorah lit. And there are 5 candles burning in the menorah. And immediately everything came flashing back to him. He remembered everything the Rebbe told him about his neighbor's daughter. He remembered what the Rebbe said, that it doesn't make a difference whether you're in Warsaw or in London, whether you're in New York or in London, or in Toronto or in London. The Chanukah gives us the power to illuminate the darkest areas. And on the 5th night of Chanukah, a Jew has the power to find the greatest darkness and light it up and illuminate it. L'chaim, l'chaim. He went back to the Rebbe afterwards, and a year later he had a meeting with the Rebbe, and he told the Rebbe over the story. And when he said the story to the Rebbe told him, the Shverat Gata Vaita Blik, my father-in-law who sent you to me, had was able to see very far into the future. That's what the Rebbe said. So Chanukah is not something that happened 2,000 years ago, right? Chanukah is a power that happens every single day of Chanukah. We have the ability to light up the darkness. We have the ability to find the darkest areas in the world and light it up. The great tzaddik, Rab Baruch of Mezhibush, had many followers who would come to spend time with the Rebbe, and amongst other Hasidic Rebbes, their students would come to them, their Hasidim would come to them usually for Yom Tov during Pesach and Sukkot, but Rab Baruch placed a great emphasis on the Yom Tov of Chanukah. And all of his followers would come to visit him every Chanukah. They would make a great effort. It was very difficult in the Ukrainian winters to travel to the Rebbe in the middle of the winter, but they would make a great effort. It was a very joyous time by the Rebbe. And one year, the first night of Chanukah, the Rebbe, Rab Baruch of Mezhibush, is standing surrounded by all of his Hasidim, and he lights the first candle of Chanukah, right? They light the first candle, and as soon as he lights the first candle, the candle starts to flicker and jumping up and down. So one of the Hasidim quickly rushed to the door to close the door to stop the wind from blowing in, but it didn't help. The candle continued to flicker. Right? So some other Hasidim rushed around, closing all the windows, making sure it's sealed shut. Everybody tried to stay in one spot. They shouldn't move. They shouldn't make wind currents. But the candle kept on jumping up and down. And suddenly, after about a minute, the candle disappeared. It disappeared. Now, usually when a candle goes out, there's like smoke that comes, you see smoke when the candle goes out. Here, it disappeared without any smoke. It completely disappeared. So the Rebbe Shamish quickly brought out some matches, and he said to the Rebbe, you want to, maybe you could relight the candle. Of course, there's no obligation to relight a candle. If Hanukkah candle goes out, you don't have to relight it. You still fulfill the mitzvah. But the custom is that we relight the Hanukkah candle. So he said to the Rebbe, you want to relight the candle? And the Rebbe motioned him, it's okay. So some of the Hasidim are looking at the Rebbe. They say, Rebbe, the candle is gone. It disappeared. Maybe you should relight it. And the Rebbe says, don't worry. The candle is doing its mission. It's doing its job. Okay, what does that mean? Nobody knows. So they go down. They go to the table, and there's a beautiful table set up with a beautiful Hanukkah party. And the Rebbe starts farbringing, and they're singing together, and he's saying over words of Torah. And this goes on for many, many hours until after midnight. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, the Hasidim hear from outside the shul in the street, they hear the wheels of a wagon rolling up to the shul. And a few seconds later, the door of the shul burst open, and Chaim, a chassid from the nearby town, comes rushing in, and Chaim's face is all red. He has some cuts on his face. There's like blood. Some areas are a little bloody. His clothing is all torn. It looks like something happened to him. And Chaim comes rushing in. The Chassidim rush over. They bring him some water. They try to help him out. And they say, Chaim, what happened? Where were you? What are you showing up here at 1 o'clock in the morning? So he says, let me tell you. A few days ago, I set out to make the trip to see my Rebbe. And as you know, it was a very difficult trip. There was a lot of snow. It was terrible weather. And I wasn't making this progress that I was expecting to make. And it looked like I wouldn't make it in time to the Rebbe. So I decided I have to do everything I could to try to get to the Rebbe for Yom Tiv. So I continued traveling. And as I'm traveling, a heavy snowstorm begins to fall. And I thought to myself, maybe I should stop, wait till the snow, till the weather's a little better. But I decided, no, it was not, I want to be with my Rebbe. So even though I knew it wasn't, maybe not the smartest thing, I decided to continue the journey. And I set out into the forest to head towards the city of Mezhebush. And in general, it's not that easy to find your way through the forest, right? The road, a very narrow, small road that's hard to always find. But now that everything is covered in snow, I quickly found myself lost in the middle of the forest. And it's Erev Yom Tiv. It's this morning, and I knew I had to get to Mezhebush for Yom Tiv, and I didn't know where to go. So I'm going around and trying to find my way. I'm trying to figure out which direction I'm going in, trying to look up at the sky, but it's very cloudy. I don't even know which direction I'm going in. And I see it's starting to get dark, and I'm getting very nervous. I don't want to be stuck alone in the woods in the middle of the night. And at that moment, suddenly, I hear noise in the side, and two bandits jump out from the side of the road, and they run over to me, and they say, "Hey, Jew, give us all your money." Okay, fine. I reach into my pocket, and I take out, 10 rubles that I brought with me, and I say, here's all the money. And they say, "No, come on. We know you have more than that." And I say, "That's all I have. You can check my pockets." And they say, "Come on, you wouldn't be traveling in the middle of the woods at night, in the middle of a snowstorm. We know you Jews. You're on some very important business trip. You have a lot of money stashed away. Tell us where it is." And I'm telling them, "Listen, I give you my word, I don't have any money." And they say, "Okay, we'll search your wagon." They get into my wagon, and they start looking all around. And, of course, they didn't find anything. So one of them picks up his stick, and he says, "Jew, you better tell us where the money is." And I tell him, "I gave you everything I have." And they start hitting me. And, nothing I can really say to them. I tell them I'm not going on business. I'm traveling to see my Rebbe. What's a Rebbe? We don't know what a Rebbe is. And they took me. They got onto the wagon, and they took me to their den in the middle of the woods. And a bunch of their friends jump out, and they all start yelling at me that I have to tell them where my money is. And I tried to explain to them that this is all the money I have, and they say it's impossible. You're a Jewish businessman. You're traveling to do business. You don't carry 10 rubles with you. You obviously have more money. They are hiding from us. And I tell them I'm not traveling on business. I'm traveling it's Yom Tiv. It's Chanukah coming up, and I'm traveling to be with my Rebbe. And they don't want to listen to me, and they say you have to wait here till our leader comes back. An hour later, the leader of the bandits shows up, this big, tough guy, and he comes in and he says, "Jew, where's the money?" I told him, listen, I'm going to see my Rebbe. I don't have any money with me. He says, "Rebbe, which Rebbe?" And I tell him I'm going to see Rabbi Baruch of Mezhebush. He says, "But it's snowing outside. What are you're traveling through the woods? It's getting dark. It's snowing. Why would you make such a trip now?" And I tell him it's very important. My Rebbe, it's very important for me to spend Yom Tov with my Rebbe. And he says, "You still believe in all that stuff. When I was younger," he tells me, "I also used to believe in that stuff. I was born into a Hasidic family," he says. "But, I don't believe in any of that anymore. I'm now the leader of these bandits. But I could see that you're answering me honestly, and you really believe in it. And you know what?" He says, "If you really want to go to your Rebbe for Yom Tov, I'll let you go. I'll let you go. Matter of fact, I'll give you back your wagon, your horses, and you can try to go to your Rebbe. But let me tell you, there's no way you're going to make it. There's no way you're going to make it. Even me and my bandits don't wander out in the woods in the middle of the night alone. Right? Too dangerous. There's no way you're going to make it to your Rebbe. But you know what? I'll make you a deal, he says. If you make it out of this forest in the middle of the night and manage to get to your Rebbe, then I'll come to see your Rebbe also. And he reached into his pocket, he pulled out his handkerchief, and he gave it to Chaim. And he says, if you manage to make it to Mezhibush, when you're at the entrance of the city, there's a big sign that says Mezhibush. Behind the sign, there's a ditch over there. Throw my handkerchief into a ditch. I'm going to have one of my men check it tomorrow and see if you made it. Okay, so I get into the wagon. I start driving away. My horses don't really want to go. My horses are pretty nervous. And we start to go. We can't see where we're going. It's pitch black. It's cloudy. We can't even see the stars. It's the end of the month. There's no moon, right? And I start to go, and and after about 2 minutes, I suddenly hear the howling of wolves in the distance. My horses start getting even more nervous, and I take my whip. I start whipping them to move, but they don't really want to move. And slowly, the howling of wolves comes closer and closer until I can actually see in the distance that I'm completely surrounded by wild animals. And my horses stop; they don't want to move. And I don't know what to do. And I look up to Hashem, and I say, Hashem, help me out. Help me out. And at that moment, right in front of my wagon, a flame appeared. A flame appeared in the middle of the air, floating in the middle of the air. And even though it was a small flame, it illuminated the whole area, my whole wagon, the animals in the distance, the wolves started to back off. And my horses saw a light in front of them. They began to walk towards the light. The light guided us. It moved with us, and it showed us the way out of the forest. And it took me some time, but I managed to make it here. And thanks to this light that guided me, of course, I made sure to throw the handkerchief there. Hopefully the leader of the bandits is going to keep his words. And at this point, Rabbi Baruch turns to his Hasidim and he says, see what I told you? I told you the candle was doing its job. Right? What's the job of a Chanukah candle? What's the job of a Chanukah candle? The job of a Chanukah candle is to find a Jew who's in the darkness, who's in an area of darkness, whether it's Chaim who was stuck in the forest, in the physical darkness of the forest, or whether it was the leader of the bandits who was stuck in an even darker place, in a deep spiritual darkness, who needed a candle to light up his life. And this is what Yom Tov stands for. This is what Chanukah stands for. And this is really what every holiday stands for and why the Chachamim established the holidays. Right? So next week, my kids are all going to be home from school. They're going to have a lot of free time. What?
Crazy people, they make school in Chanukah.
This week to school in Chanukah. Next week, you're going to have a few days of vacation. Now, they're going to have a lot of free time. They're going to try to figure out how they could spend their time. Right? Now, of course, most of the day, they're going to spend davening and learning Torah, right? Of course, no question about it. But they're also, they also have a little bit of extra time, and they look for ways to waste their time, right? So one of the ways they like to waste their time is they like to play video games. Not for too long, but for a few minutes every day, right? And one of the games they like is a game called Mario, right? I'm sure some of you guys know it. Now, we're not going to discuss Luigi tonight. We don't want to get political, but let's discuss Mario. Okay? So everybody we all know who Mario is. He's a simple plumber who lives in the Mushroom Kingdom, and he has some missions he has to do. He has some jobs he has to do, and he has a bunch of different stages and levels he has to pass through, but it's very difficult for him. There are a lot of challenges, a lot of enemies who try to attack him everywhere he goes. He has all these obstacles in front of him. And he has a very difficult time making it through the obstacles, right? If he tries to go through by himself without any, on his own, he's not going to be able to make it. So what happens? So on each level, on each stage that he finds himself in the game, there are different power-ups that he can get, right? What type of power-ups does Mario have? What? Anybody knows what? Oh, okay. We have some examples over here. Now, these power-ups give Mario special abilities, right? And they help him overcome the challenges that he faces, right? There are some power-ups that will make Mario bigger or stronger, right? There are some power-ups that give him, as you said, fire ability or ice ability, which he can use to overpower his enemies. There are power-ups that allow him to run faster, right? There are power-ups that allow him to jump higher. There are power-ups that can allow him to dig underground or to climb up walls. There are power-ups that allow him to fly or glide through the air, right? He could acquire a protective shell that will allow him to block attacks from his enemies, right? There are power-ups that allow him to swim faster underwater. There are those that allow him to pass through or even break through barriers, right? And there are even power-ups that make him completely invincible. Now, these power-ups, in addition to making his job easier, right? Some of these power-ups can even allow Mario to transform his enemies into coins or into different rewards that he can pick up, right? Now, and that's the only way. If Mario doesn't use any power-ups, there's no way he's going to make it through. He's got to use these power-ups. Now, sometimes in life, we feel like Mario, right? We're this, simple plumber or whatever our job is, and we have a difficult job a difficult world we need to navigate, right? And wouldn't it be great if we had power-ups in our own life to give us special abilities to do our job, right? To take the darkness around us and to transform it into light. And this is what the Yomim Tovim are about. Hashem strategically places on every level and every year, he places throughout the year a bunch of different holidays. And each holiday has its own power-up. It gives us a special ability, right? And this ability enables us to continue our journey throughout the year. Once Mario gets the power-up, it stays with him even after he leaves the power-up, right? And this is what happens throughout the year, right? We come to Pesach, we get the freedom power-up. We can free ourselves from all our restrictions, all our limitations, right? We have the Torah power-up on Shavuos. And on Chanukah, right, we have the light power. This is the power-up that allows us to illuminate the darkest areas in the world around us. We can take the greatest darkness and transform it into light. And this, says Rav Levi Yitzchak of Raditchev, is the reason why the destruction, why the victory of King Chizkiyahu is not celebrated every year, but the miracle of Chanukah is. What happened? After the Jews defeated the Syrian Greek army, right? They were of course happy and they celebrated, but they didn't make a holiday, right? It was nice. They lit candles and they saw a great miracle happen, but there was no reason to establish an eternal holiday for such a thing, right? We have so many miracles. We don't establish holidays for every miracle. Right? It was a great miracle. The Jews were able to stand up for themselves, fight the powerful forces around them, fight the darkness around them. The one candle burned for 8 days. But it was a one-time event. A year passed by, says Rav Levi Yitzchak. And a year later, the Chachamim realized something. They realized that all of the special abilities that the Jewish people exhibited a year earlier, all of these special powers that the Maccabees brought out in their time of struggle, was being repeated. They felt that they were now, a year later, they had the same power to overcome the darkness and to illuminate the greatest darkness that they had a year earlier. And this is why they came along and he said, this is not a one-time event. This is the Maccabees, through their tremendous Mesiras Nefesh, through their tremendous self-sacrifice, were able to create an eternal source of power that gives a Jew every single year, throughout our history, the power to illuminate the greatest darkness. And this is why they established Chanukah as a Yom Tov. And this is why all of our Yom Tovim exist, not just because a miracle took place 2,000, 3,000 years ago. It's because every single year, this power is reawakened, and we all can tap into this power to serve Hashem better. And this is why you look around every year on Hanukkah, and you see Jews who maybe throughout the entire year hid their Judaism, hid their Yiddishkeit, right? On Hanukkah, suddenly they're all willing to light the menorah. They're all proud of who they are. They're all proud of who they are. You have parades through the streets, right, with Hanukkah menorahs, right? And you see Jews who, I saw many children who I know from public school throughout the year are embarrassed to walk in the street with their kippah, right? Hanukkah, we come out in the street, make a big Hanukkah parade, suddenly they're all out there wearing a kippah, wearing a special t-shirt, right? They're proud of who they are, right? It's not just the parade that does it. It's the power of Hanukkah. right? The power that the Maccabees were able to create 2,000 years ago was not a one-time event. It's something that lives on, and we can reuse this power every single year. And this is why we celebrate Chanukah. To conclude with the final story, this story occurred in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, in the middle of the Holocaust, one of the darkest times in our history. On Erev Chanukah was a very particularly grim day. Many Jews were taken out and shot, and it was very difficult for them. And they knew that that night was Chanukah, so the Jews managed to find a place to gather together. They found like an old pair of shoes that they were able to make a little menorah out of. They used some shoe polish to make oil. They had some ripped garments that they made into wicks, right? And this small group of Jews was in this area of darkness, in this concentration camp, and they got together to light the menorah. And they turned to the Blozhever Rebbe, right? Tzvi Melech Spira, who was the leader of the Jews in that camp, and they asked him to light the menorah. So he gets up the first night of Chanukah, and he starts to he's about to light the menorah, and he begins making the blessings. So he says the first blessing. What's the first blessing we say? The first blessing is that Hashem gave us, thank you, blessed Hashem, who gave us the mitzvah of lighting the Chanukah candles. Okay, very nice. Everybody said Amen. Then he went on to the second blessing, right? The second blessing is that Hashem performed miracles for our ancestors many years ago. Okay, he said the second blessing. And then he's about to start the third blessing. What is the third blessing? The third blessing is the blessing of Shehecheyanu. We thank Hashem for giving us life and enabling us to reach this special time. And he's about to start saying the blessing, and suddenly he stops. He stops. And everybody's looking at him. And he waits, he spends about a minute thinking. And then he begins the blessing, he says the whole blessing, and everybody answers Amen, and he lights the menorah. Afterwards, one of the Jews who was there in the concentration camp goes over to the Rebbe and he says, Rebbe, I don't understand. I can understand why you made the first blessing, right? Hashem gave us a mitzvah to light Chanukah menorah. I could even understand the second blessing, right? Hashem did miracles for our ancestors, right? That's it's something we should celebrate. We should be happy, right? But how could you make the blessing, thanking Hashem for keeping us alive and sustaining us and bringing us to this time, to this occasion? You're celebrating the fact that Hashem brought us to this time, to this occasion. Look at where we are. Look at where we are. How could you thank Hashem for that? And the Rebbe tells me, I had the same question. And that's why I stopped before I lit the candle. And I wasn't sure, should I make such a blessing? But then I looked around and I saw that even in the darkest time, all the Jews of the camp had managed to gather together. And in the darkest time, we somehow put together a menorah. We found some old shoes and some shoe polish, and we managed to put together a menorah, even in this darkest time. And I turned to Hashem and I said, thank you, Hashem, for allowing me to see this time, for showing us that no matter where we find ourselves, even in the darkest places, the light of Chanukah will always shine through. So we all need to realize that Chanukah that's coming up is not just a celebration of something that happened 2,000 years ago. It's a special power-up that we're about to get now, right? It's a power-up that will allow us to transform all of our enemies, all of the darkness around us, all of the obstacle around us into the greatest source of light. L'chaim, l'chaim.